Trying to do this second talk is a little difficult for me. It reminds me of a joke my dad used to tell about running into an old friend and saying to him, "Where have you been?" And he said, "Oh, we just got back from a cruise around the world." He said, "Well, where are you going to go next year?" And the friend says, "Well, somewhere else." So I don't know exactly where else to go with this talk except to revisit some of the things, and just like that cruise, we might visit places that we haven't seen. We might spend more time at some of the places we did go the last time. And to begin, we're going to have to start with some territory that we've seen a good number of times. I'm going to again explain and expound upon how it is that liberals think and why it is that they side invariably with evil over good, wrong over right, and the behaviors that lead to failure over those that lead to success. The first time, by the way, the talk was called Regurgitating the Apple, how modern liberals think. I no longer call it that for two reasons. One, my publishers felt the word regurgitating just didn't sell a lot of books. And two, I'd give it a different name just to give it the veneer of being a different talk. It's now called Hating What's Right. By the way, Regurgitating the Apple, how modern liberals think. Regurgitating the Apple was my brilliant explanation of how they think. You see, if mankind lost paradise when we ate the apple and gained knowledge of right and wrong, they believe that if they can just force us all to regurgitate the apple, give up all knowledge of right and wrong, we can return to paradise. So let's start with just some of the bullet points of what we need to revisit. First and foremost, to understand how the modern liberal thinks, I borrowed a line from Professor Alan Bloom in his brilliant The Closing of the American Mind. And if there are any liberals watching at home, are there any liberals in the room? Yes, good, okay. Well, I promise not to be condescending. All right, condescending means to talk down to people. You see, Professor Bloom was trying to figure out why suddenly in the 80s his students were suddenly so stupid. Okay, he didn't use the word stupid. He's a lot more diplomatic than I am. He'd been teaching since the 50s, and in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. He said that what he received from the public schools, from the primary schools, were what he called scholars. Right? Not all of them as smart as each other, some of them harder working, some of them more accomplished. But what he meant by scholars, and he tells us in this book, and by the way, the reason I asked if you were liberal, this book was called Essential Reading for Anyone Who Wishes to Understand the State of Liberal Education in America Today by the New York Times. I'll wait while you genuflect. All right, so this is not just some right-wing book. That's what it was called. And he was trying to discover, and he would be presented with scholars. And what he meant by scholars were people who arrived at the university to seek the better literature, the better religion, the better philosophy, the better forms of governance. Suddenly, in the 1980s, by no coincidence, when the first children of the 60s were arriving in school, when the first generation, not to have been brought up by those from the greatest generation and those with the values that preceded the greatest generation, it was no coincidence that they arrived in the schools not only not seeking the better, but denying the existence of the better. And what Bloom concluded was that they were raised to believe, this is the big bullet point, they were raised to believe that indiscriminateness is a moral imperative. That the only way to be moral is to not discriminate between right and wrong, good and evil, better and worse, truth and lies. Because your act of discriminating between these things, might just be a reflection of your personal discrimination, your bigotries. They were raised to believe that indiscriminateness is a moral imperative because its opposite is the evil of having discriminated. The second bullet point, and this is an essential corollary, is that indiscriminateness of thought does not lead to indiscriminateness of policy. It leads the modern liberal to invariably side with evil over good, wrong over right, and the behaviors that lead to failure over those that lead to success. Why? Very simply. If nothing is to be recognized as better or worse than anything else, then success is de facto unjust. There is no explanation for success if nothing is better than anything else. And the greater the success, the greater the injustice. Conversely, and for the same reason, failure is de facto proof of victimization And the greater the failure, the greater the proof of the victim, or the greater the victimization. So it becomes the modern liberal's job, and by the way, I'm not the only one to have recognized this. Dinesh D'Souza, in What's So Great About America, a book that if it was written by a liberal would have a question mark at the end, but doesn't in this case. He says the multiculturalist, which is the indiscriminate with regards to culture, that all cultures must be deemed equally good and equally right and equally valid, that the multiculturalist must de facto, invariably and inevitably is the words I use, and I got a lot of junk for that, but de facto is exactly the same point. The multiculturalist must de facto become an apologist for tyranny. He must also de facto become an antagonist to liberty. And in fact, if you extrapolate this out to all of those who are indiscriminate across the board, not just with regard to culture, but they must de facto become antagonistic towards all that is good, right, and successful, and antagonistic towards all that is evil, failed, and wrong. Think about it this way. If we can agree, if we can stipulate that the United States is the most successful nation in human history, that we are the most prosperous, that we are the strongest, that we are the most ingenious and creative and productive. If we can stipulate that, this needs to be explained. And in essence, there are only two possibilities to explain this. Either there is something exceptional about our culture, about our founding documents, about the unprecedented Judeo-Christian heritage, about our Protestant work ethic, whatever it is that combines to create culture, and that what is exceptional about our culture nurtures productivity, prosperity, strength, or there is nothing special about our culture, and therefore our success is A, unjust, and the duration, we are now finishing the first decade of the second American century, the duration and the magnitude of our success makes this injustice not just accidental, not just some luck along the way. It's got to be proof positive of our having cheated. Our success is de facto unjust, and the degree of our success proves that we are the most unjust peoples in the history of the world. At this point, the modern liberal, the multiculturalist, has already taken one of those two possibilities off the table. He cannot believe that it is an exceptional culture because he wouldn't be a multiculturalist if he could. So with only two possibilities and having removed one of them from the table, the modern liberal does not have to engage in what he considers a hate crime, which is rational and moral thought, because the answer is preordained. America must have stolen our success because any other conclusion would be an act of bigotry. Therefore, at this point, he may finally engage his intellect for the first time, not to arrive at the truth, but for no other purpose than to support the preordained conclusion that America is the most unjust nation in the history of the world. So he will proclaim quite articulately from time to time that Americans are evil imperialists. Not because we are imperialists, because we're not imperialists. The facts are overwhelmingly clear. Could anybody legitimately argue that after World War II we put a gun to the Japanese heads, put our government in charge and said, destroy our auto industry, it'll make us richer? Could anybody legitimately argue that after World War II we took over the French government, put a gun to their heads, and said for the next 60 years, run around the world stabbing us in the back, it'll be good for America? Of course not. We are not imperialists. Think about this. When Nazi Germany was the world superpower, they tried to take over the world. France and Napoleon tried to take over the world. Great Britain tried to take over the world. Islam has tried to take over the world. We are the world's lone superpower. We have not taken over Canada. Right? It's not like we can't. We've got the greatest military in the history of the world. They've got what? Like they've got Celine Dion. Of course we are not imperialists, but it doesn't matter to the left that we're not imperialists. There has to be something other than our exceptionalism that explains it, because truth, fact, reason, logic, and evidence are not employed by the Democrat, by the modern liberal, the dominant force in today's Democrat Party. By the way, I am not the only one to have noticed this. It is Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn, the leftist author of the most assigned text on American history. The book that our children, or you guys, probably learned about our history from, who said that objective truth, objective facts, objectivity is undesirable. It's undesirable if you seek to have history support a political agenda. I'm misquoting him slightly, but get the gist. That was me paraphrasing to my best. But objective truth is undesirable if history should serve a social purpose. And what is that social purpose? To show that good isn't good and evil isn't evil, right isn't right and wrong isn't wrong. The behaviors that lead to failure aren't bad, the ones that lead to success aren't good. And by the way, it is for this reason that any time you see an anti-America rally masquerading as an anti-war rally, hand in hand with those who are trying to undermine America's defense, are those who are screaming hatred against the Jews of Israel. Jew hatred is as endemic to modern liberalism, de facto to the multiculturalist, as is America hatred, for exactly the same reason. How do you explain the history of the Jews? How do you explain that these people have survived with their culture intact longer than any other civilization in human history? How do you explain that anywhere where the Jew lives, and because of the diaspora, he lives all over, in any time, in any place, so long as he is not being murdered, he tends to thrive? How do you explain that, just as it says in the Bible, that any nation that treats its Jews well will do well? Any nation that treats its Jews poorly will do poorly, like the Arab and Muslim world today? How do you explain that the nation that treats the Jews better than any other nation in the history of the world, America, is the best and most successful nation in the history of the world? And finally, how do you explain the miracle of this tiny dot of desert in the Middle East that had been administered by the Arabs and the Muslims for millennia, accomplishing nothing? Almost instantly upon the return of the Jews and Jewish administration, becomes a first world economy with a thriving symphony orchestra and Nobel Prize winning physicists and cutting edge technologies. How do you explain this? There are only two possibilities. Either there is something exceptional about the Jewish culture, something about the Ten Commandments, something about the Torah and the Talmud that fosters success, or there is nothing special about the Jews, and therefore their success is unjust. And again, the duration and magnitude of the success proves that it has to be chicanery. There are only two possibilities, and once again, the multiculturalists, the indiscriminate, those who cannot recognize the better, for fear that the recognition of the better might just be their own bigotries. There are only two possibilities, and the multiculturalist, the modern liberal, has taken one of those off the table before he even begins. De facto, the only moral thing that the modern liberal, the dominant force in today's Democrat Party, is allowed to believe is that not only are the Jews bad people, they are amongst the worst people in the history of the world. It is no surprise, and the first thing that Barack Obama, sorry, that was a legitimate mistake. Barack Obama did was to release seek to release the closing of Guantanamo Bay, to seek to give tons of money to Hamas, to demand that Israel help rebuild Gaza, etc., etc. Not only will the modern, are you guys with me? Yeah? All right. Not only must the modern liberal invariably attack that which is good, right, and successful, he must justify the crimes, the evil, failure, and wrong. He must justify it. He must turn the act of criminality. Let me try it this way. The act of criminality is de facto proof that the criminal has been victimized. That's all the proof they need. The fact that the terrorists flew those airplanes into our buildings is proof positive that the terrorists have been provoked. Because to not believe they have been provoked would be an act of racism. You are saying that the Muslims are bad people, that they would murder wantonly, unprovoked, and that is not allowed de facto to the multiculturalist. So the act of criminality is proof positive of victimization, and the more heinous the crime, the more victimized they must have been. And once again, it does not matter what the facts and evidence prove. Liberals, modern liberals, are not allowed to employ fact and evidence. Fact, reason, and evidence are things employed by people who are attempting to discriminate. It doesn't matter if the facts overwhelmingly debunk the claim that they were provoked. It was de facto the chickens coming home to roost. And when Barack Obama's mentor, Jeremiah Wright, gave the explanation what it is that we did that was so horrible, that it was that we deserved to be burned alive and attacked in our buildings, he let out a litany of half-truths and outright lies. It does not matter because objective truth is undesirable to the left. Seeking the truth is an act of bigotry to the left. In fact, not only must the modern liberal attack that which is good, prove that the attacks were provoked, he must elevate the degree of evil committed by the victim. I'll explain this. He must elevate the provocation, the wrong committed by the victim, to exactly the level of the evil that the modern liberal is invariably championing. You see, it's not enough if you're trying to prove that wanton murder was really justifiable homicide. It is not enough simply to point out some wrongs that America may have done. You see, if I go and I shoot my neighbor and I prove to you that he did the wrong of playing his music too loud at 3 a.m., that is definitely a wrong, but it does not turn my killing him into justifiable homicide. His wrong has to rise to the level of the strength that I use to stop him. So it's not enough for the people on the left to simply disparage America. They must elevate the evil that they invent to put on us to exactly the level of the evil they are invariably championing. So when Ward Churchill calls the victims of 9/11 little Eichmanns, a vicious slander against innocently, newly murdered innocents, he does not do so because the sous chef at Windows on the World was going home at night plotting the takeover of Czechoslovakia. He does not do so because the intern at Cantor Fitzgerald would go home at night and make mini concentration camps. He does so because the only way to justify what was a miniature Holocaust, lowercase h, an all-consuming hellish flame in downtown Manhattan, the only way to turn that wanton murder into justifiable homicide was to call the victims little Eichmanns. When Senator Dick Durbin calls our troops at Guantanamo Bay like the Nazis, he doesn't do so because they are factually, objectively, any way at all like the Nazis. In fact, just a simple fact to put this in perspective, after 5 years of the Third Reich, tens of millions of innocents had been slaughtered. At the end of 5 years at Guantanamo Bay, not a single suspected terrorist died at the hands of an American, not one. So why then would this Democrat, this liberal, this United States Senator compare our troops to the Nazis? Because the evil that he is championing, the Islamic and Arab world, are not only like the Nazis, but in World War II, which to some of you is ancient history, but it's just my dad's generation. In World War II, the Arabs and the Islamists allied with the Nazis. When America gave our blood and our treasure to liberate the Europeans from the Nazis because they were too stupid to recognize the evil that was mounting on their border, because Pierre was there with Jacques, and Jacques said to Pierre, that Hitler guy looks like a threat. And Jacques said, well, what kind of threat? And Pierre said, an immediate threat. And Jacques said, is that an imminent threat? And by the time they discovered what kind of threat Hitler was, The Nazis were doing the jig through the most ironically named monument in human history, the Arc de Triomphe. Which makes you wonder, how many times do you have to march to the Arc de Triomphe with your hands in the air before you change the name of the thing? So when the Americans liberated the Europeans and the Nazis had to flee for their lives, where did they go? They went to see their allies and their friends and their buddies in the Muslim and Arab world, where they taught them the Nazi tricks of torture, terror, and propaganda. The reason Dick Durbin calls our troops the most honorable people in the history of warfare, like the Nazis, is not because they're like the Nazis, it's because he's defending people who are like the Nazis, and the modern liberal must elevate the evil committed by the innocent to the level of the evil they are invariably championing. So that when Jimmy Carter plagiarizes maps, falsifies documents, and engages in objectively disprovable, obviously disprovable slanders against the good people of Israel, calling the Jewish state an apartheid state? Israel? Why does he do that? Not because Israel is an apartheid state, but what he's defending is an apartheid state. There could be nothing more apartheid than Islam that says kill all infidels. In the Jewish homeland, the Muslim shrines are treated as if they were Jewish shrines, with honor. Why does Jimmy Carter engage in this slander? Or why, when you watch a pro-Palestinian marching down the street in the anti-America rallies, will they say that the Jews are committing the genocide of the Palestinian people? 60 plus years, the Jews have been committing the genocide of the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian population is bigger than it's ever been. Either the Jews aren't trying to commit genocide, or the Jews are schmucks. Let me just move on to something else, because the inability of the left to recognize the better things in life. And when I say better, when I say success, I want to be very clear. I am not talking financially necessarily, although being financially successful is great. There's nothing wrong with it. The left disagrees. The left doesn't like financial success. And it's for a very simple reason, and this wasn't the point of my talk, so don't let me get too far off on this. The left, because they don't learn anything after kindergarten. What they believe is true, and I don't want to go that way right now, but everything I ever really need to know I learned in kindergarten is their Bible. And one of the things you learn in kindergarten is that life is zero-sum. That if Janie and Sally hold on to the ball, then Bobby and Billy don't get to play. And they grow up believing that life is zero-sum. And if life is zero-sum, then the way that you prevent failure, the way that you prevent suffering, the way you prevent poverty is by preventing success. If my success causes your failure, then the way to prevent your failure is to prevent my success. Now, the truth is exactly the opposite. The truth is in that the grown-up world, all ships rise with the tide. When you recognize this, and by the way, there's a million ways to look at it, and not to be missed is the economic crisis that's now a world crisis. Why? Because when the tide goes down, everybody goes down with it. When the tide goes up, when America is in a period of growth, the world's economy grows. You can see it on the micro level. If life were zero-sum, it would be insane for Bloomingdale's to open in the same shopping mall as Macy's. Not to mention the 50 stores in between. But because everybody who comes to the mall is good for everybody, Macy's success doesn't hurt the little store, nor does it matter who the person came to shop. Where if they came to shop at Macy's, buying a suit, and while they're waiting for it to be tailored, go down and buy a pretzel, or if they came in to buy a pretzel and on the way out they pass through Macy's and pick up a tie clip. Either way, everybody's success raises the tide for everybody. This is a fundamental reason why the left is so antagonistic towards America, and why the right recognizes America to be the greatest gift the world has ever seen. Because if all ships rise with the tide, then America's unprecedented success has brought about, as it has, unprecedented goodness around the world, medicines, prosperity, technologies. But if life is zero-sum, America's unprecedented greatness makes us the cause of unprecedented suffering. All right, that was off on a tangent. In order to help people live better lives, the Republican seeks to encourage them to engage more in the behaviors that lead to success. The better behaviors. The modern liberal, incapable of recognizing better behaviors, not only does not promote the better behaviors, he attacks them. He attacks the better behaviors as, after all, if nothing's better than anything else, what we say is better must be the beneficiary of our bigotries. Thomas Sowell, in A Conflict of Visions, or it might be the Vision of the Anointed, said that which is held in esteem qualifies to be their target. That which is held in disdain qualifies to be their mascot. I think the wording there was just a little too cutesy, but what he means is that there is no other criterion by which the modern liberal comes to their beliefs and their policies than to take what you believe and attack it. See, having any beliefs at all is an act of bigotry. It is their job to destroy your beliefs, whether it's the belief that America is good or that Islamic fascism is evil. So incapable, let me give you a couple of examples. You and I recognize that childhood abstinence is a behavior that increases one's chances for success. All right? It doesn't guarantee it, but it makes more likely, or it makes, let's do it the other way, it makes less likely one's chances for success if, as a child, they are promiscuous. All right? Forget the moral component. Just simply consider the practicalities. If your boy's out messing around, he's not home reading a book. If your daughter's down at the abortion mill again, she's not at the library studying for the SATs. If your son is in a hospital bed somewhere dying of AIDS, that's not good for his future success. I think I can even get some Democrats to admit that dying puts a damper on future success. So we encourage our children and others in the village that it takes to have a better chance at a good and happy and successful life by being abstinent throughout their childhood. The modern liberal sees our promotion of abstinence as a form of bigotry, our religious fanaticism. They actually promote promiscuity in the movies, in the TV shows, in the schools. NARAL, a pro-abortion group masquerading as a pro-choice organization, holds a fundraiser. I don't want to be vulgar, so I don't want to say the word. It's the whole word. They hold a fundraiser called F Abstinence. Why would you want to F abstinence? Okay, I can understand the argument that not every child will be abstinent. But why would you want to destroy childhood abstinence altogether? And the answer is because the modern liberal invariably promotes the behaviors that lead to failure. Invariably. So here's the difference. We try to help people live a better life by encouraging the behaviors that lead to success. The Democrat promotes the behaviors, the modern liberal, the dominant force in today's Democrat Party. It's not all Democrats. There's a name for a Democrat who is a thoughtful, moral person. It's called a Republican. The Republican, the conservative will seek to help people live a better life by encouraging the behaviors that lead to success. The Democrat will seek to rehabilitate the image of the behaviors that are bad. And when their policies invariably, as they do, as they have, as they must, lead to greater suffering, when their promotion of childhood promiscuity leads to unwanted pregnancies and poverty for 2 generations, the out-of-wedlock born child and the single mother that they've promoted to single motherhood, who's to say that's wrong? When it leads, as it has and it must, to an epidemic of venereal diseases amongst children, at this point, The Democrat screams about his compassion, confiscates our money to create a program designed simply to somewhat mitigate the consequences of the failure that they have promoted. So when they're pro-promiscuity, and there was an episode of The Family Guy, a cartoon, in which the child Meg tells her mother that she has taken a vow of abstinence until she's adult. Instead of saying, that is great, honey, now you won't get STDs, now you won't get pregnant. That's wonderful if that's what you want. Instead of being supportive, the mother ridicules her and tries to seduce her into having sex with strangers. And so when this mentality leads to unwanted pregnancies, the answer from the Democrat is to confiscate our money to open more abortion mills. When it leads, as it has and as it must, like in New York City, where 1 out of 4 children, 1 out of 4 girls, are infected with a venereal disease, some with several. The policy of the Democrat is not to promote not engaging in promiscuous sex. Instead, it is to forcibly inject every child with a vaccine that might prevent one of the myriad sexual diseases that the Democrats, by their policies, have made epidemic. Let me give you another example. Anybody who thinks, recognizes that the way for an immigrant to have a chance at a better life is for him to learn the language of the majority. It's self-evident. If he's a salesman, he has a better opportunity to sell his wares if he can speak to more people. Right? If he's a scientist in his home country, in his native country, he has a better chance of landing a $250,000 a year job at Amgen or Eli Lilly if he can speak to the HR person. It's self-evident. So to help the immigrant live a better life in America, we promote the better behavior, not morally better, that's not what I'm claiming, the practically better. We promote that he learn the language of the majority of the people. The Democrat will attack us for that. Will call us cultural imperialists. They will attack us, say that we're committing cultural genocide. And when they encourage the immigrant not to learn the language of the majority, and because of the Democrats' policy, instead of getting a $250,000 a year job, he's pushing a broom or making the beds at Motel 6, this is when the Democrat jumps into action, screams about how compassionate he is, takes our money, and raises the minimum wage. So now, thanks to the Democrat, this man who would have been making $250,000 a year and perhaps curing cancer is now making $8.75 an hour, not $8.25. Thank you, Democrats. And as we have witnessed over and over and over again, the Democrat does not alleviate problems. He simply flip-flops them. It is an Orwellian mentality. So that in the end, not only does the Democrat not require, and I've got to be careful, I need the modern liberal, the dominant force. I could call on this all the time. The modern liberal, the dominant force in today's Democrat Party, not only does he not encourage the immigrant to learn the language of the majority, but you know these immigrants have rights. And they can't exercise all of those rights if they don't speak the language. So in order not to take away their rights, the majority has to learn the language of every single minority. It gets flipped on its head invariably. It is an Orwellian philosophy because whenever you are championing, and this is what they're championing, evil over good, wrong over right, and the behaviors that lead to failure over those that lead to success, obviously it's going to be Orwellian. So let me just finish up by saying who these people are. And let me just... There are a couple of commonalities in the community that we most associate with modern liberalism. And again, not people who voted for Barack Obama. I'm sure there are some people in the middle, because I don't think America's divided in two. I think we're divided in three. I think there are those of us who get it, who actually attempt to think. And we tend to vote Republican, but there are some Democrats who have just a slight difference that they want more social programs, but they don't believe that America's evil, bad, and wrong, that we're imperialists and all these things. And then there's a whole bunch in the middle who can be moved. And I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the Rosie O'Donnells. I mean, what can you do with a Rosie O'Donnell? I mean, this is a woman who claimed the most heinous slanders against America, exonerating the terrorists, blaming it on George Bush 9/11. It was an inside job. And proof that it was an inside job was that never before in history has fire melted steel. No, that's a very powerful scientific argument with one flaw. Fire is how you melt steel. Fire is the only way you melt steel. And it's not even that Rosie O'Donnell doesn't know this. You know that she's watched Flashdance. Over and over and over again. Yeah, I don't know, maybe if the construction worker from the Village People had a welder's torch. But what can you... I mean, has she never seen her silverware bend as she eats? She has to know that heat. So what fact could you possibly put in front of Rosie O'Donnell that would make her say, oh, I did not know that. Now I love America. And here are the basic commonalities. I'll finish up. I don't want to keep you guys from the important work you do here. One of the commonalities that is essential is the modern liberal is isolated from the consequences of his own beliefs. Whether it is the Hollywood liberal, or let me pick Bruce Springsteen. I picked Bruce Springsteen for a reason. I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan. I do not for a moment think that when he promotes policies that destroy the public schools, he does so because he's standing up on a veranda in Beverly Hills looking down at the lights below going, ha 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 ha. I will destroy the public schools because my kid goes to private school. Instead, Bruce Springsteen really does care. And so when he reads in the paper, he comes across something on television that says gang violence is destroying our schools, he wants to know if that's true. So he asks his daughter, honey, did you see any gang violence today? And he said, no, Dad, not down by the stables. No, nothing. And Bruce Springsteen, he cares so much, he actually gets in the car, drives a mile down the street to his next door neighbor, and he knocks on the door and he says, Jackson Brown, did your kid get beat up in school today? And he says, no, not down by the motor pool. It's not that they really want to promote evil, failure, and wrong. The problem is that when you live in a utopia, when there is no cost or consequence, like there is no cost or consequence to Bruce Springsteen of anything he believes. You know, he went on a tour. It was the Rising Tour. He went and he played guitar for 88 days and grossed $188 million. So when he militates for increased taxes, so then when he comes home from that tour, instead of $188 million, he's only got $148 million, it does not affect his life one whit. When I, who every once in a while might cross that line, because I have a screenplay that I wrote and struggled with and didn't make a penny in 1985, didn't make a penny in 86, didn't make a penny in 87, and in 88 I sold it for $250,000, and they take a big chunk of that. That does make a difference in my life. The guy who worked at a minimum wage job and then got a promotion and now at the age of 65 finally crosses that threshold where he's making less money in 1 year than Springsteen makes from residuals from a song he wrote 30 years ago. And Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen say, yeah, take more of his money. It affects him. It doesn't affect Springsteen. Nor does it affect the other group. Well, there goes my dream of being his opening act. The other group that you associate with the mindless left are the college children. Why? Because no matter how much they binge drink, no matter how much they projectile vomit, no matter how much they go wild for the camera, the next day they wake up on lush manicured lawns. Right? No matter how bad their hangover is, they slide a card through a reader, and somebody else went out and bought them food, prepared their food, served them the food. When they're done, they do their dishes for them. So when they militate for things, and my point is this, and then I'll take questions. Stupidity is a luxury. And you will find time and time and time and again that those who are overwhelmingly on the left are those who can afford to be. Those who do not suffer the consequences of their stupidity. Those who, like Springsteen or like Susan Sarandon or like the rest of them, have a special floor set aside for celebrities at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, so that when they destroy our public health, our healthcare system, it doesn't affect them at all. And I want to make one more point, which is of these two communities, celebrity, let's call it, and academia. And by the way, I want you to take note that the word academic is a well-known synonym for the word meaningless. Right? As in, it's all academic anyway, let's go get some real work done. Even in these two groups, there are subcultures that aren't as brain dead as the others. In the world of celebrity, there's one group that votes Republican, or is more likely to support the Republican candidate and ideals. This group is just as wealthy. They became just as wealthy at just the same age. They are just as beautiful as the other celebrities, and yet they vote Republican. Why? Who am I talking about? Professional athletes. Why? Because a professional athlete works in a field where truth is objective. You catch the ball, you drop the ball. It doesn't matter how articulately you explain that the ball is an anti-Semite. You know, the ball goes through the uprights or it doesn't go through the uprights. It doesn't matter how much you scream that the ball is patriarchal. And the same is true on the college campus in what I got to find a nice way of saying it, the bullcrap professions of ethnic studies and women prior to the antediluvian flood, blah, 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 blah. The people who vote Republican on the college campuses are those who work in the hard sciences, where truth is truth, where it doesn't matter how much you complain that the phosphorus hates black people. It either reacts or it doesn't react. You can't lie. You can't manipulate. Liberals cannot survive in the fields where truth is truth.